Hello, hello. This is the first time I've ever gone live, so I apologize for being a noob at this. I know I'm 2 minutes behind, but that's because it said my live stream ended, and I was trying to figure that out. So anyways, feel free to ask all the questions you want. You can do that through the chat. I'm kind of watching here, and you'll see me darting my eyes around as I try to keep track of what's going on and all of that goodness. But really, I just wanted to give you guys a bit of an update on what it's like to actually live in freezing cold temperatures. I don't have the technology to put this up on the screen, so I'm just going to show you right now. It's minus 32 Celsius with the wind chill. Actually, it says like minus 32 because there's no wind right now. But tonight, it's forecast to get down to, if you can see at the bottom there, minus 39. The wind is supposed to pick up, and they're estimating a wind chill at about minus 52, which is pretty significant, really, for any place. We seldom get that cold here. It's not often, or it's quite often we get down below minus 25 or 30. But to get with a wind chill down to minus 50 or further, it's not breaking records, but it's pretty darn close. Anyways, that being said, living in the freezing temperatures up in Canada, there's one thing I've learned about insulation. A lot of people will try to use building science to try to determine what they're going to use for insulation. Problem with that is scale, really. With a building, you're dealing with factors that are very large, hundreds of thousands of square feet or tens of thousands of square feet. In a van, you've maybe got 110, 150, 200 if you've got a massive van. And the problem is there's a lot of factors that affect your ability to retain heat in a van that you just don't have in a building. For example, your door seals. You've got a great big door seal on the back door or back doors if you have two. You've got one on your side door. If you don't have a partition between the front of your van, the driver's cabin, if you will, and your living space, you have all of those door seals. Add on to that windows, and you quickly find that you have an extreme amount of temperature loss or heat exchange that you just don't have in great big buildings. It would be like building a Walmart supercenter with 3,000 doors. It just isn't something that happens. The other problem with scale is that the furnaces we use put out a significant amount of heat for the ratio of space we use. So my house, I have about 2,500 square feet of space, and I've got about 150,000 BTU furnace. Well, my van is probably about 120 square feet, and 120, is that right? 130, 140, and I've got an almost 20,000 BTU furnace. So ratio-wise, the furnace in my van is a behemoth compared to what I've got in my house. So when it comes to planning, a lot of building science just doesn't translate over well to planning for your van. Second, when it comes to the amount of thickness and the amount of room you have in a van, you're quite limited. So some people will say, well, let's just put 2 inches of insulation on all sides of the van. Well, my van is a smaller van than most. And I've only got about 60 inches from one side to the other inside room. Then I've got the wheel wells. Then I put my walls up. I put up insulation. All of a sudden, 2 inches becomes 4 inches. Plus you have wall on top of that becomes 5 inches. That's 60 inches, gets shorter by the minute. So when I was trying to figure out how much I wanted to put into my van when it came to insulation, I just used a simple rule of thumb. I wanted to find where that bell curve, where enough just made a difference, but that I wasn't going so far overboard that things like window heat loss or door seal heat loss weren't going to significantly inhibit what I was putting in. Sure, I could have put in 2 inches on each side and the top, and it would have been great, but I still would have lost 90% of my heat out the door seals. So if I could do a 1/2 inch of insulation and preserve almost to the same amount, it ends up giving me a lot more room inside. The efficiency is very similar when I factor in the heat loss out of the windows and doors, and all of a sudden I have a lot more room, and it's a lot cheaper. There's a lot less build that goes into it. Your time is saved. So just so you know what I've got in my van, I've put about a 1/2 inch of foam on the floor, only on the front half. So where my bed and seat covers the back half. I just posted a tour video if you want to understand what I'm talking about. The back half, I didn't put any insulation other than a 1/4 inch of plywood, which I have that subfloor all the way across. I also have like a vinyl one piece. It's like linoleum, but it looks nice. It's like a wood grain. And so that's all I have for insulation. On top of that, like I said, I've got a 17,000 BTU Chinese diesel heater, also known as a 5 kilowatt. I bought it as an 8 kilowatt, got suckered in. When I did the math on the maximum fuel usage, it's only 5,000 kilowatts. From what I understand, an 8,000 kilowatt doesn't exist. Regardless, with 18,000 BTU, with a 1/2 inch on the floor, I have 1 inch just behind the driver's side wall where I have my cabinetry so that things in my drawers and all of that doesn't freeze. Above that, I have windows with only Reflectix. You can kind of see them here. It's Reflectix. On the outside, I have a simple, it's like a micro fleece that I just glued onto it with 3M Super 77 spray on glue. It's kind of like rubber cement that you can spray. And then on the roof, I have a 1/2 inch of silver board, which is a polystyrene, but has foil on both sides. And that's all I have. And it keeps me toasty warm. Right now, I wish I could show this to you. In fact, I can. Let me just get up the temperature inside the van, and then I'm going to turn my laptop. You can see there, it's 21 degrees Celsius in here. It's minus 40 outside, around there. And I'm toasty as a clam in here. So a 1/2 inch is by far more than anyone in any climate should ever need. If you're going to be living full time up where I'm at, or further north, and you want to put in an inch, then by all means, I don't think that would be a waste at all. But if you're going to be running a furnace to any degree, unless you're powering unless your furnace is a tea light, you're going to need a lot less insulation than you think. So with 17,000 BTU, I can afford to lose tons out the windows. I can afford to lose tons out the door seals. And if I added an inch or an inch and a half or 2 inches, I would just be wasting space, wasting time, wasting the amount of things I had to buy to put into the van. And honestly, I've never turned the furnace on unless it's well below zero. Because even if it's zero, my own body heat under a down blanket, it's a $30 Costco down blanket, keeps me toasty warm. So that's my thoughts on insulation. Next, I wanted to talk about places where the heat gets lost first. I talked a little bit about this already, but the key is to remember that you've got a couple things happening. You have, first of all, heat rising, and heat loss will go up to a degree. Then you also have thermal bridging. Thermal bridging is where you have a piece of metal or something that conducts heat that can be outside where it's very cold and is also able to conduct a direct line to the inside where it's supposed to be warm. Those thermal bridges will draw heat out of your van very, very quickly. So when you think about the metal around the edge of the door seal in your door, that thermal bridge will be drawing out heat all night long. And there's not a whole lot you can do about it. I've considered trying to build some sort of a seal that could open and close with my door, but it really just became exercise in futility. Even if I was able to get something to work very well, it would just be a lot of effort and time that I'd rather spend out doing stuff in the snow, skiing, adventuring, that kind of thing. So, excuse me, you really have to weigh what's important to you. So windows and door seals are probably your biggest source of heat loss. Very close to that would be the roof. Thermal bridges, by the time you're done insulating and everything, the remaining thermal bridges is probably similar to your roof. And then the third would be your walls, and the fourth is the floor. Honestly, if I built a van again, I probably wouldn't put anything more than a simple layer of maybe even 1/4 inch we use here, the rest of the world, they say it burns and creates noxious gases, but polystyrene. In Canada, we use it in all of our houses. Not all, but most new houses have a skin of it all around the outside shell of the house. When it burns here, well, it doesn't burn for one, and two, it doesn't have the noxious gas. They've changed things in the chemical makeup so that it doesn't do that. And it's very, very common because it's impervious to water. It won't absorb any humidity at all. And it just creates a wonderful vapor barrier that also insulates. So everything in my van is closed cell polystyrene. It also has no VOCs that it lets off. That was the other thing that was important to me. I didn't want to be stuck in a sealed box with a bunch of chemicals floating around in the air. Now, polystyrene in other parts of the world, I can't talk about. I just know in Canada that that's largely what we've used and developed to be used with our houses, and they've changed things so that it doesn't cause the problems that it used to be known for, or that it might be known for overseas. I believe in the UK they use Kingspan or Celotex. I think those are very similar. I don't know a lot about them because we just don't have them here. And I think that says a lot about the insulative properties of some things. Like if it really made that big of a difference, I think that it would be all over the place here, but it isn't. So floor, I wouldn't worry that much about. Walls and roof, a ½ inch. If you put a ½ inch in the floor, I think that you'll be golden. The next thing I wanted to talk about was condensation. Condensation is a hot topic in the Facebook groups, and videos all over the place. You hear everyone talking about how you have to worry about condensation. Now, we do have a pretty dry climate here, so I'm not going to call myself an expert on condensation, but the one thing that does happen in the extreme cold is that when you have a cold surface and you have hot, humid air, which is something that humans just expel while they sleep, for example, or cook with propane, we would get a lot of condensation. I can sleep in this van overnight, 2 adults, and we wake up in the morning and more than 50% of the windows are still clear. The bottom half usually is where there's a little bit of condensation that's gathered, but it's nothing that won't clear in a few minutes of running the vehicle with the defrost on. The other thing to keep in mind is people talk about condensation inside the walls of the vehicle. If you have a good vapor barrier, that should never happen. Unless you trap moisture in when you put up the vapor barrier, there's no need to worry about that intense condensation happening in the walls. A lot of people will say their vans rusted out as a result of it. While I can't comment specifically on whether or not that was caused by condensation, it usually comes from complaining. The complaining usually comes from people who live in areas where vans are generally rotten anyways. So whether or not it rusted from the inside or the outside, I'm going to guess that there's probably not a lot of evidence that would suggest it came from the inside. I do know people have pulled apart their vans and have found condensation. So while it's generally a possibility, I think if you put up a proper vapor barrier, then you won't have an issue. Really, all you have to do is stop that hot, humid air from touching the cold surfaces. And if you have insulation, then your vapor barrier, then the inside of your cabin, it really never should get past the insulation to the cold surfaces. The other thing that I've mentioned to people in the past, and I've never had to do it because I've never had a significant amount of condensation, is capture it, create a trap. So most of us have windows in our van. If you used a piece of duct tape and created a trough on the bottom of a patch of window that you left open, well, that's going to be a great dehumidifier. That's exactly how dehumidifiers work, commercial ones. So if you wanted to really trap and try to funnel that condensation somewhere, creating a patch of window or leaving a portion of your window exposed will allow that condensation to accumulate on the window, drain down whatever kind of a trough you've made underneath there into a cup or a bucket, or to drain down into your sink, whatever it is that you have to capture that condensation. And you can effectively dehumidify to a degree yourself. Now, the other thing that I will mention is I have pulled the body panels off of my vehicle after sleeping in the van. Zero humidity, zero condensation. I think that the chances of there being any transfer of the humid air inside my vehicle into the walls is highly unlikely. I mean, it's a 1995, so this definitely isn't an amazing vehicle by any engineering standards. But I think that even just with the tightness of the body panels, the interior panels on the van itself, just limit how much humid air can transfer. So I think that with a vapor barrier, or even without a vapor barrier, most people aren't going to have a problem. If you live somewhere where it rains 11 months of the year, okay, then maybe you will have some issues, but it shouldn't be anything that a vapor barrier and separating the warm air from the cold surfaces shouldn't be able to be controlled. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was kind of how to plan for your van. And I've gone over a lot of bits and pieces of it, but to sum it up, just don't let the insulation tail wag the dog. A lot of people will sit there and geek out over the insulation and how much they're going to do. And if that's your thing, if you want to do it, if you like math, then go ahead and try to figure out heat loss coefficients. You've got 10 to 20 meters of door seal in a van, depending whether it's small or large. You could do all the math on that, and if you really wanted to know, you could probably come pretty close. But really, in the end, I think you're going to end up realizing that a half inch of insulation will probably be about right. Again, if you want to do more, by all means, I'm not going to criticize you. It's just a lot of effort and a lot of time spent for really a marginal return. I mean, if at minus 40, my furnace, which right now is set to 2.5 hertz, the bottom is 1.6, the top is 4.5. So it's probably running at about 10,000 BTU right now, maybe 12,000 BTU. And it's keeping it, well, let's see if the temperature's changed. 20 degrees right now. Then I'm not sure that anyone else, even if you're around 0 or at 10 below, is going to notice anything different by having an inch instead of a half inch. So when it comes down to it, like I said, don't let the insulation tail wag the dog. Keep things simple. Don't overcomplicate things. I think that if I lived anywhere else in the world, all I would do is just get a layer of Reflectix. Oh, that's something else I wanted to talk about. A lot of people will say how nasty and poor and how garbage Reflectix is. I think this stuff's wonderful, and I'll tell you why as soon as I'm done talking about what I would suggest. I would suggest someone gets Reflectix. It doesn't have a huge insulative property when it comes to stopping heat loss, but a layer or 2 layers of it can easily fit behind the body panels. You can pull the body panels off. You can tape in your Reflectix, use it as your vapor barrier at the same time, and put the body panels back on. So it saves you a lot of time if you have interior panels you can use. And with that Reflectix cut out for windows, if it works for me here, and my partner, she's picky. She likes her warmth. She's not like me. She's not a winter snow baby. With these window panels in, she swears that it changes, easily by 10 or 15 degrees. That 50 to 80% is what she thinks it saves. So if it works for her here at minus 40, then it should work for most other people. But let me go back to Reflectix before I wrap things up. Reflectix, the reason I like Reflectix is it has this foil finish on it. Now, if any of you have seen those emergency blankets, they're literally micro paper thin foil plastic, really. But the beauty in that is it reflects the heat that's around a person on an infrared level. So if I'm emitting heat and that heat hits this wall, it reflects that heat back. So if I put my cheek on this, okay, it's going to be cool. It has bubbles of air, so it has some insulative properties. But if I'm against it, it's not that great. If I'm an inch or more away, it is significant. So keep in mind that Reflectix, while it may not have a good R value or a good heat transfer coefficient, it's not what it was designed for. It was designed to reflect heat back in or to reflect heat out. So if you put that between your interior panel of your vehicle and the metal, well, where it's touching the metal, it probably won't be that great, but it'll take the edge off in a major way. Anywhere where it's not touching, if there's heat outside of that Reflectix, the Reflectix will just reflect it back outside. So in the summertime, Reflectix is wonderful, especially if it has a bit of airspace between it. And in the wintertime, same thing. Even if it's between the body panel and the metal, it can be touching that body panel. I can lay against the side of the wall of my van and not be cold at all while it's minus 40 outside. I did spend some time sleeping in the back of a pickup truck, and I tell you, there was one night with 3 of my friends, and I was the one who was lucky enough to be spooning the wheel well. I was on a foam mat, so below me was fine, but where I was touching the metal, and it was only about freezing outside, it was significant. It would suck the heat out of me anytime I would be touching it. I can lay against this wall, which is about maybe 3/8 of an inch thick of wood fiber board with cloth on top of it, and then it has nothing behind it right now. The whole passenger side of my van right now has no insulation at all. I was going to put some Reflectix, but it just hasn't been cold enough for me to feel it's that urgent. And I can lay against it, no problems at all. So there is significant thermal break just in this wood panel with the upholstery on it. And if I put Reflectix under there, it would be even more. So when it comes to insulating your van, just keep it simple. Don't let the insulation tail wag the dog, and I think that you'll be more than fine. I just see there's not really any questions. Hopefully that means I answer them all. I'm by no means an expert. I'm just a Canadian who loves to get out into the wilderness, and I've found that this van greatly gives me the ability to do that. So glad to be able to share some of my thoughts and experience on insulation. I won't call it expertise, because anyone who says they're an expert probably isn't. So yeah. If you do have any questions, you can leave them on the video afterwards, and I'll keep watch and answer. But I appreciate everyone for joining, and yeah, have a great night. We'll see you in the morning. I'll also be posting an update in the comments of this video of what the final temperature gets down to tonight. I'm hoping it's minus 53 with the wind chill. I'm willing to accept that because it won't get that cold without it. But if it does, I spent this summer, about 6 months ago, in Death Valley when the air conditioning quit in my van. It was 47 degrees above zero. So in 6 months, this will give me a temperature swing of 100 degrees Celsius, which, I don't know, I added it to my bucket list today just because it's not something I don't think very many people are going to get to do. And I don't know, it just feels good to check things off, as easy as it is. Anyways, have a good night, and we will see you in the morning.